Up next, we will be revisiting the Axios NPM package hack that happened, a supply chain attack. NPM, of course, Axios NPM was downloaded 100 million times per week, and it was compromised by North Korean threat actors. We talked about it a little bit on the show last week. We're revisiting it with Feross Aboukhadijeh. I hope I pronounced that correctly. What?
The problem? Is that right?
Yes. So
we can ask him.
Yeah, we can ask him. Socket detected the malicious update within 6 minutes, and we are lucky to have Feross join us.
What were you guys doing for the
6 minutes?
So sleep at the wheel? No, I'm kidding.
No. Definitely not asleep at the wheel. It takes time to download packages, scan them, put them through our battery of tests.
Yeah.
So I think 6 minutes is actually pretty good.
It's incredible.
It's fantastic. I'm just
but yeah, maybe zoom out and tell us about like the actual process that Socket runs, your business, how the system works, and how you're able to detect supply chain hacks and cybersecurity threats so quickly.
Yeah, totally. So Socket was among the first to detect and report on this incident. Mm-hmm. We built a system that goes out and downloads every open source package in existence within a few seconds. Mm-hmm. So we support about 19 ecosystems, and this includes really all sorts of third-party code that might be used to build applications today. Yep. Includes things like your AI models, your open source dependencies, even your editor extensions, your Chrome extensions, like really any code coming from third-party sources, and we put it through a battery of really intense static analysis, maintainer behavior analysis, and then of course a bunch of AI, and then human researchers as well. And we try to help kind of make a determination: is this something safe that you want to use, within your application or within your organization?
Yeah. So can you talk about the shape of the threat that was posed by the Axios supply chain attack? Because there's a wide range of, a zero-day exploit that gives you full access to someone's device or computer or system, all the way to just something that, it would crash if this exploit was used, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe we just start from the beginning and summarize the attack for folks. Yeah. So there was a North Korean state actor that socially engineered the lead open source maintainer of the Axios package, and it was honestly quite a sophisticated and impressive effort. They posed as a founder of a fake company. They created a fake Slack workspace, invited the maintainer to join it. Yeah. They staged a fake Microsoft Teams call, and the website was made just incredibly compelling. They used the official SDKs from Microsoft Teams to create like really realistic components in the page. They joined the call, and by the way, they also developed a relationship over the course of weeks, right? Yeah. So this wasn't like a situation in which you would expect to be on guard or on defense. Yeah. And at some point in the call just cuts out, and the browser says, "Hey, you got to install an update," and it gives them a binary file that they're told to install. And so this maintainer thinks, okay, I guess I got to install this update real quick so I can get back into the call. And it turns out that's how they compromised their device. So it's not just like a phishing link or something like that. This was a targeted attack. They also targeted me and a bunch of people at our company as well. So they targeted a whole bunch of the top NPM maintainers who have access to a lot of packages.
Interesting. Then in terms of once they get control over, they phish a particular credential, a particular device for a developer who has access to push changes to a package like Axios. What are they actually changing in Axios to create a vulnerability in the supply chain, in the software supply chain?
Yeah, so they publish poisoned versions of the package that silently install what's called a remote access Trojan, which is basically a way for the attacker to just remotely control your device and basically do whatever the attacker wants. It's like they're sitting in front of your computer on the keyboard, typing whatever they want onto your system. Yeah. And what they did with it was they kind of pulled all the most interesting files and credentials off the system. So things like if you have a crypto wallet, like they're taking the keys for that, they're going to definitely want the crypto. Yeah. If you got if you're logged into NPM, right, they pull those credentials so they can spread like as a worm and kind of continue to infect the next set in the attack, right? So it's actually like this self-replicating kind of cycle where they get these credentials and then they use them to go on to the next stage. And then this is I mean, the thing I think I want to emphasize here for people is this isn't just an isolated incident, because this has been kind of the most recent blow in this kind of series of compromises and attacks against the software supply chain that has been happening really over the last 6 months in a really intense manner. Yeah. And we've seen it really pick up in the last month. Yep. With Team PCP compromising Aqua Security and the Trivy scanner, and then that cascaded into Light LLM being compromised. Another security company, Checkmarks, was compromised.
What happened with Light LLM and how, like, do you have a good sense of how that contributed to the breach at Mercor?
So it's part of the campaign of Team PCP. So they dropped the same kind of self-propagating worm called canister worm into the package. And what you have to realize is once you run a compromised open source package on your system, you kind of have to rotate all your credentials, like all your tokens and keys and passwords. And it's a really hard thing to do very thoroughly and very completely. And so I think that we're going to see a long tail over the next, probably 12 months of follow-on attacks from this set of compromises, because the group claims, Team PCP claims that they've stolen 300 gigabytes of compressed credentials. Yeah. So that's, think about that, 300 gigabytes of stolen passwords, API keys, GitHub Action tokens. I mean, they're sitting on so much. It's like a gold mine in terms of like what's gonna follow on from this. So I think it's not surprising that that you're seeing companies affected, right?
Yeah. So why the boom in the last 6 months? It feels like it must be tied to vibe coding or AI agents. Is this that they have more powerful tools so they're able to do more damage, or is it because our systems are getting weaker because we're pushing more vibe code to production? Is it both? Like what got us to this place where we see this takeoff in cybersecurity threats?
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. It's definitely become a top concern. I think we're hearing at a lot of our customers and prospects that are contacting us that this has now become a board level concern. Yeah. Everybody is asking, how are we not going to be affected by the next one? Yeah. So I would say that, fundamentally, like if you really zoom out and ask, why is this why is this happening? Yeah. It's because the whole software supply chain is built on blind trust. Yeah. I mean, you're downloading code from random people on the internet that you've never met. You don't know who they are. And you're like, let's just run it, right? Like, let's just hit run. And like, I hope it's fine. I hope it's good, and I'm going to give it full access to my system, right? Yep. No permissions model, right? No review. And no one looks at the code, right? Yeah. Before they run it. And unlike an iPhone app or a mobile phone app where it has to ask for permission to do sensitive things like access your camera or your microphone or your location or your contacts or your files, right? Open source packages just get everything. You just run them, they get everything. So, also there's this asymmetry in security, and this has always been true. So this is kind of more of the bigger picture. Part of the bigger picture here is that defenders have a much harder job than attackers because they have to guard against really all the ways that you can possibly get attacked. And the attacker has to just find one way in, right? So it's asymmetric. And so when attackers realize, hey, look, open source, the way that companies use it has changed in the last decade. We no longer use, just a handful of components like WordPress, Apache, PHP, these kinds of big components. We actually pull in some cases, it's like 1,000 open source libraries just to get Hello World to show up on the screen, right? Yeah, it's crazy, the diffusion in the number of these things. Yeah. So, they realize, look, I could just attack one of these things, one of these libraries, and I can get into a company. Like, that's so much easier than attacking head on and trying to hack the company directly, right? I can find one of, and we have customers, by the way, they have 500,000 plus open source components in their environment. So just think about that, right? Any one of those is a way into the company. Yeah, right? Yeah. The funniest package is even. It just tells you if a number is an even number, and it has one dependency, is odd. because it's a everybody loves that example. Stacked. Exactly, it's a great example. Tell me more about the shape of your business. I mean, it seems like you're getting a lot of calls from companies and boards. Like, what does it look like to work with you? How are you plugging into companies? Do you have a business line around going and hunting bug bounties? How should I think about the business of Socket these days? Yeah. Well, look, people contact us when they want to get their software supply chains under control, right? Mm-hmm. So right now, what that looks like is companies that are deploying AI agents and AI coding assistants across their companies have one big question in their mind, which is, how do I know what my agents are doing?
Yep.
How do I know what my developers are doing with those agents?
Yep.
And that is the problem that we help them get under control. So the way to think about Socket is we are a software supply chain defense company, right? We protect your software supply chain. So when an AI agent is making a decision to go and install something in order to accomplish the task that's been given to it, it will go through Socket first. So we are the guardrail to ensure that no malicious components get installed. And if you take a concrete example, Axios, the attack we've been talking about, that malicious package was live for about 3 hours, meaning anyone who was asking their agent, like, hey, go build me whatever, right? Doesn't matter what. One of the first things is probably going to grab it because it needs to do HTTP requests. It's going to say, oh, Axios, right?
Yep.
And, so the question is, how do we, before that gets taken down, right? Or even before the community is aware, how do we defend our organizations and our applications from those packages that have had these implants, right? It's really top of mind for people. I would say it's kind of become like a number one concern for CISOs and for boards.
Yeah.
What is your view on cybersecurity as a category? I think a lot of we've talked to people on air, off air that were surprised about the sell-off in cyber due to LLMs, just because LLMs themselves are creating all of these new threat vectors, and so there was kind of a disconnect there. But what is your sort of more general outlook on the category?
I think in the short term, security is going to get worse. It's going to get harder. So I think the answer is really the opposite. Like companies and products and things like Socket are actually more needed than ever before. With Mythos coming out yesterday, that's going to find a ton of vulnerabilities, and it's finding vulnerabilities all across the software supply chain. And so I think more vulnerabilities discovered means there's more urgency to fix the ecosystem, and it goes from being a lower priority on people's lists to a higher priority. And so I think the short to medium term effect is going to be massive awareness. It's going to be supply chain security becoming more top of mind for everybody. That's obviously great for us as a business, great for the ecosystem, because I think it's hard to invest in things and get justification for budget if you're a security leader, if you don't have a fire or an emergency to point to. And so this really helps there. I think longer term, we have to see. I think ultimately, I think AI solves the asymmetry problem that we were talking about earlier, because for the first time, defenders now have an infinitely scalable army of AI agents doing their bidding and doing continuous security analysis. And that's all work that would have been way too expensive or impractical for their humans to do before. And so the attacker's advantage of only needing to find one way in starts to erode when the defender has the ability to kind of continuously audit everything. And so I think longer term, once we get through this rough period, I actually am very optimistic about, security improving. But one thing I will say is, with security, one of the reasons I love the field and why it's such an exciting field to be in is that, it's a cat and mouse game. So it's a dynamic system. So it's not like, architecture or bridge building where, you learn the rules of physics and you know how to build a bridge that's going to, withstand gravity and these forces that don't change. In security, the minute you think you got things under control, the attacker evolves, the attacker switches their strategy, and they have access to the same AI tools that the defenders have. And so, it's really a field that is, I think, always going to be growing and always going to be, a great business to be in.
Has a cybersecurity company ever got caught, like, sort of LARPing as a hacker group in order to drive demand? Sort of like hacking a popular company in order to drive demand for their product? Because you said CISOs oftentimes need to be able to point at a fire to justify budget.
That's super funny you asked, because that was always the conspiracy theory that folks had about the antivirus companies back in the 90s and in the 2000s, was that they were the creators of the viruses, so they could sell you the antiviruses.
Yeah. Create the problem, sell the solution.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I'm not aware of any companies getting caught doing that. I think there's enough bad guys out there that have realized the opportunity sitting there in plain sight that I don't think that you got to go to conspiracy theories to kind of explain why attackers
no tinfoil hat needed.
Yeah, no tinfoil hat needed. Yeah, I mean.
How do you think about these economic impact assessments? When Axios, I feel like everyone jumped on it very quickly. Andre Karpathy shared that he didn't have the repo pinned, but he hadn't updated, so he was able to dodge it for that 3 or 6 hours, right? So a lot of people got lucky, but do we have an idea of like the actual toll that particular attack had? Because it felt like the number could have been very huge, but a lot of people were able to get to it fast enough that there wasn't necessarily a massive crypto breach or a massive PII breach. But do you have an idea of like how the industry is thinking about the size of and the scale of the economic impact?
Yeah. Well, I don't have an economic dollar amount for you, but if you look at the number of downloads per week of this package, it's 100 million weekly downloads, right?
Yeah.
That, you do the math on that and you figure out like, what does that mean across that 3-hour window? I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of people who installed it. And that's, across CI/CD environments, local laptops, that's stuff that's been shipped into production. If you take, another metric would be, how many folks have reached out to Socket, in the 24 hours following that attack to become a customer and make sure that, they could use our tools to assess whether they were affected and to protect themselves for future attacks. We had almost 2,000 organizations sign up for an account in the 24 hours. Which, to put it in perspective, it's a significant percentage of all our full user base. So I think this is very, very widespread. And this is the thing about the supply chain, right? Is like, it's really not a matter of like, if you're going to get hit. When you're talking about these very, very widely deployed dependencies and, including even some of my own code, right? I know I have these, you picked on is even, I have some code that is similar to that, a little bit less outrageous of an example, but, and it's in probably almost every Node.js app. And that's just how the supply chain works today. So it's really, not surprising that everyone is going to get hit by this eventually, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on the show and breaking it down for us.
Yeah, really
appreciate everything you're doing. It seems more important than ever. And so have a great rest of your week.
Come back on soon.
We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Goodbye.
Cheers.
Up next.